So if you've been following any of my projects recently online with any of my live videos or anything like that, you guys would know about this. This is an exhaust project that I'm doing for an Ironhead Harley Davidson, a spiral tip exhaust. As you can see, there's a lot of pie cuts. I've had a lot of people ask if I could show them how to do pie cuts on their own. Now, there's a lot of videos out there on how to do pie cuts. A lot of them are kind of involved with the whole math thing, and I know some of us are not majoring in calculus. I'm going to show you the way that I do it. I do it in a much simpler way. I'll show you all the tools and the measuring devices that you need, which are all simple stuff you can pick up at a local hardware store. I'll show you the easy way, or at least what I think of as the easy way. Now, before I get started on that, I want to let you guys know WeldMetalsOnline.com, they have recently expanded their selection on their website. There is a whole bunch more new things that you can get, such as this pocket square kit that you can purchase as a gift. Really good for fabricators and home do-it-yourselfers and stuff like that. So they have a whole bunch of new stuff to select from. If you go on WeldMetalsOnline.com, I'll have a link in the description below. Use my code StickmanFab24 and you can get 10% off anything on the store, even after some of these sales end. So here's a couple things that you would need. First thing you'll need is a notepad or some paper of some sort. I really like to use graph paper for things like this. Next thing you'll need is an angle finder, caliper of some sort. You can either use a compass or you can do what I do and get something circular that is the radius that you're looking for to make the bend. Now, for marking on the pipe, I like to use paint markers. Regular Sharpie markers don't work very well because they get rubbed off really easily, and they also don't stick to polished aluminum pipe very well, or polished. They don't stick to polished stainless steel very well, so I like to use the paint markers and some sort of wraparound ruler, or a tape measure will work just fine as well. Now, the reason we do pie cuts is in order to get something to go around a curve, and usually when we have to go around a curve, we need the radius of the curve. For example, the radius that I picked for the pipe that I did for the exhaust, 1 1/4 inch radius, which is a 2.5 inch diameter, which is the same diameter as the pipe that I'm using. So I have a piece of pipe that I'm using, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with that. Now I'm going to draw everything to scale, 1 to 1. Since I'm working with smaller pipe, I can do that. If you're working with bigger pipe, you may not be able to do this, but any exhaust tubing and stuff like that, you can work off of graph paper, no problem. So I'm going to draw my circle, line it up with my graph lines as best as I can, and trace around it. You can also set your compass to whatever radius or diameter you want. This is a 2.5 inch diameter, which is a 1 1/4 inch radius. And the nice thing about graph paper, it's very easy to find the center. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my angle finder, set it to 90 degrees. Now I've already decided that I'm going to do 9-degree cuts. Now, because I'm doing 9-degree cuts, that means each time that two pie cuts meet up, it's going to be 18-degree change. Because I got two 9-degree cuts meeting up with each other. Hopefully that makes sense. So I got to make a mark at every 18 degrees. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my 90-degree angle like this. So there's my 90-degree angle, and in between that, I'm going to make my 18-degree lines. So I'll set my angle finder every 18 degrees. Now I'm going to make sure that I hold this line right on my 90-degree mark every time, otherwise my lines will be off. So there's my 18-degree lines. This is a 2.5 inch diameter. Each one of these are 18 degrees. Now the simplest thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my diameter of the pipe that I need. So the diameter of the pipe that I'm using, a diameter pipe that I use for the motorcycle exhaust, is 2.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 2.5 inches on each one of these lines from the circle here. Alright, so I went right to the edge of the paper. That's fine. So now I'll take my straight edge and connect the dots. So those are my pie cuts right there. Now, the reason why I drew everything out was because instead of doing a bunch of math as to figure out how long my cuts need to be, I can literally just sit here and measure the distance between these. So on the hard side, I'm going to have 1.21, and just double check to make sure all these match. Okay. So these are all on this far side 1.21 inches, and I'll measure the inside. So I have here 0.41, 0.413, 0.413, 0.413. So here I have 0.413 inches. But now I've got the lengths to everything that I need if I was to make this specific pie cut, which is what I did 14 times for that. And now I'll grab a piece of pipe and I'll show you. So this is a piece of 2.5 inch polished stainless steel exhaust tubing. Same diameter that I'm working with here. As you can see, I was doing a bunch of pie cuts. Now I'm going to take my wraparound measuring tape. You can get these really cheap on eBay, Amazon, whatever. They're like $5. This one is magnetic, however, it won't stick to stainless tubing. You can also just use a tape measure. Now I'm going to wrap this around. First I got to do is find the circumference of the pipe. Just a hair over 8 inches. I'll make a mark at 0, holding this tightly, and I'll make a mark at 4 inches. I have a mark there, and I have a mark there. I have a mark right where my finger and my thumb are, which are exactly 180 degrees apart from each other. At least they should be. Now, if you don't have a square cut end that is perfectly square with this, make sure you make a square cut end. You need one. Because I'm going to take my square right here. You can also take your angle finder. This is another tool that you would need to have. This square, you can get this again, Home Depot or Lowe's. This is where I got that. I think this one was about $25, but you can get a fixed 2-foot square for like 10. Make sure this is square up against your cut right here like that. Nice and square. Have enough contact to make sure it's a square cut. Hold this against the pipe and draw a line. Flip this one over and I'll do the same thing on the other side. That's a nice straight, very visible line. Okay? Now, if I needed to cut further than where that line's marked, all I would have to do is I would have to take a ruler or a straight edge, hold it about halfway up the mark, make sure it's straight with that, and then just draw the rest of the way. Before you make any cuts, this is the saw that I use to cut this. Make sure you use a saw that can cut straight cuts. If it does not cut straight cuts, don't use it for this. It'll mess you up. You can also use a grinder to cut them, and I'll show you how you can mark and do that as well, but we'll focus on this for right now. So if you were to make this cut, first thing I would do is somewhere on the clamp or somewhere very visible, I would make a mark that stays consistent. I would measure from the bottom of your base here to the top, which is your radius or half your diameter. Since we're working with 2.5 inch pipe, the radius is 1.25 inches. I measure 1.25 inches up, make a mark, and then I'll make my first cut. Now that I made my first cut, which is 9 degrees right here, what I would do is take my caliper, set it at my long side, which is 1.21 inches, and put it on the end here, and make a mark. To ensure that we are getting a square cut, I will also mark on this side the measurement that I got, which was 0.413 inches. 413 inches. Mark. Short side, long side. So then I'll take my saw, shove my piece in, and make sure the cuts are going towards each other. So if I have one cut going this way, I want to make sure I have one cut going towards itself like that. I'm going to take my flexible tape here, match up your wrap tape to both marks there. It's going to be a little offset, and draw it. And put it about where it's going to meet up. And then I can take a ruler, or in this case my angle finder here, and find a spot that'll be consistent for me to measure. So if I need to cut it this direction, then I will measure from the back side here. And if I'm going to make it that big, then I'm going to measure about 30 millimeters from the back side of this part of the saw every time. And every time I make a cut, whoops, I'm going to cut here, move it down, measure 30 millimeters, make sure my lines match up, cut again, and then so on. So I'll flip it over again, move it down, measure 30 millimeters, cut again. That's how I would do it on a saw. If you don't have a saw like this, there's another way to do it. Now this way is a little more time consuming, but it will work, and it'll work very well. You just have to focus a lot. Again, take my caliper. I got the inside 0.413. I got the outside 1.25. To ensure that I am getting a good quality cut, I can take my tape, outline, and mark it each time. Now I would mark each one at a time instead of doing a bunch in a row, because if I do a bunch in a row, then one could be off, and if one's off, then the other one's off even more and even more and even more, and then next thing you know, instead of cutting 9 degrees, you're cutting like 13, 15 degrees, and it throws you all off. But I can just follow that with my grinder, my bandsaw, Dremel, whatever I got. Time consuming, but doable. And that's it. That is how I make pie cuts on exhaust systems. I like to use a chop saw. I always recommend using some sort of chop saw, friction blade saw, evolution saw, something like that. But if you don't have one, you can draw around like I showed you with a wraparound, or with a wrap tape like this, and draw it and cut each one. It's time consuming and it's daunting, but it works well. So thank you for watching this. I've had a lot of people ask about this specific video, and I'm glad I'm able to help some of you out and do some of these projects yourself, because with some practice you can fit up stuff like this. This looks complicated, but it's not as complicated as you would think. It just makes my brain hurt every time I look at it. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. You're going to see more of that motorcycle exhaust coming up. I'll see you later.